In this video, I'm going to share with you the technique that I use to create flowers like you see on this piece of cyanotype printed paper. These are gold and these are silver. It's kind of a time-consuming process, but well worth the effort. Sure, you could paint some paper a deep blue color and stamp on top of it, but cyanotype is just such a beautiful blue color, number one, and it gives you a very lovely, very smooth background to work on. So it's really a good, it's worth the effort to go through it. I'll show you in this demonstration how to do it on, this is watercolor paper, which is what these were done on. Any heavyweight paper will do. I'll also be demonstrating on some 100% cotton muslin from the fabric store and some 100% silk that I ordered from a company online called Dharma Trading. Your fabric, if you do choose to use fabric, does need to be washed to remove any sizing that the fabric has in it. Now, because I do a lot of this, I purchase a professional textile detergent from Dharma Trading. But any detergents will work. I recommend that you choose one that's baby safe because it will have fewer chemicals in it. And you definitely don't want to use any water softeners. And if you put your cotton in the dryer to dry it, don't use any dryer sheets. Your silk should be dried on a rack or on a hanger so that it doesn't go in through the dryer. You will need some cyanotype sensitizer. This is the Jacquard company, and I really like their sensitizers. They're easy to use. The directions are right on the back. It's very simple and very safe. There's nothing in this. I use it with children. It's a safe material to use. So you can order this from Amazon or from local craft stores. And at the bottom of this video, I'll have links to some of the supplies that I have purchased. You'll also want to have some kind of tape. I like blue painter's tape because it's removed easily. A container for mixing your cyanotype sensitizer solution, and a little foam brush for applying it. I also have a foam brush that I'll be using with my paints. And I have this little brush, which I'll actually not use for painting. I'll use it later underneath water to remove paint that's down inside my stamp so that I can get all that paint out of my stamp, and it makes a great little cleaning supply. For paints, I'm using metallic acrylics. I'm using Liquitex heavy body acrylics in gold and silver. And then I have some golden acrylics in iridescent bronze. So I have 3 different metallics here. Any metallic acrylic will work for this project. I like acrylics because they're permanent. That way, if you cut your images apart later and use glue or something like that on them, it won't smear or remove the surface. And for my palette, I don't spend a lot of money on palette, although I do use palette paper. These are just egg cartons that have nice spaces on the lids, and I use those. When you're doing the cyanotype papers, you'll need a piece of cardboard. You can see this is a well-used piece of cardboard. And I like to use these acrylic sheets. They're just sheets of acrylic that I bought at the local craft store. They're really meant to be used in poster frames, but they sell them individually, so I buy some of these to use, mainly because glass will do the same job, but I have a tendency to break glass, so I prefer the acrylic sheets. They're much safer. And you can get either frame glass, you can use an old frame, just something to cover your cyanotype work with. So I think I've covered all the basic materials. I do always keep paper towels on hand and access to water, but overall this will cover most of what you're going to need for this. The first step is to mix up your cyanotype solution according to the directions on the package. It's basically equal portions of solution A and solution B. Mix them up in a container. I'm working on a piece of cardboard, or you can work on a piece of paper, just something to absorb excess liquid. I'm going to use the foam brush, and I do have this video speeded up to save time, but what I'm doing is brushing the cyanotype fluid on the paper. It's kind of a greenish yellow color at this point, and I'm going to put it aside in a darkened place to let it dry. I usually put these in a closet. This next piece that I'm doing is the cotton. I have cotton fabric. You have to probably use a little bit more cyanotype solution. You want to saturate your fabric well. You can see the way it's coming through on the paper underneath. And again, once that's completely saturated with cyanotype solution, it will go in my closet to dry. And the last piece that I have to do is my piece of silk. And I did pick up a rather dirty piece of cardboard to work on. It's old dried cyanotype fluid. It has no impact at all on the cyanotype that you're going to be creating. It's simply that the silk is very thin, so it shows through. And this one will also go in the closet to dry with the others. Papers are dry, so next step, I'm going to take them outside to expose them to sunlight. I'm going to cover them with a piece of plexiglass, mainly to keep the wind from blowing them around my yard. And I use these office supply clips to keep the whole thing together. This is especially important if you're doing a traditional cyanotype where you might have some leaves or a stencil or something else on top of your paper. It's less essential with this. It's more just to keep things from blowing around outside. And I may get a little bit of texture. My plexiglass is a little bit dirty. It's stained from using it so much with cyanotypes. So it'll be interesting also to see what we get. So I'm going to take it out to the sun, and it'll stay out in the sun for anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the intensity of the sunlight. You really cannot overexpose the papers that you make yourself with cyanotype solution. You can overexpose the ones where you buy the paper already treated, and when that happens, you lose your color completely. So this is the best way to go for this, because if you forget about it, it's okay. It will still work out. I'm going to do the same thing with the cotton fabric. Stretch it out on my piece of cardboard, add the plexiglass or a sheet of acrylic or a piece of glass on the top, and clip it down just to keep it from blowing around on a windy day. That's really the only purpose of that when you don't have any objects on top of your cyanotype cloth or paper. And I'm going to then do the same thing with my silk, but it was a little bit wrinkly, so I stretched it a bit with some pieces of tape in order to have it a little bit flatter and not get those little wrinkles in it when I put the plexiglass on top. And that's a little helpful with that. The next step is to expose your pieces to sunlight. I took these out to my back deck. You can see that they're turning a dark blue. And generally, depending on the amount of sunlight that you have, it can take 30 minutes, sometimes more, sometimes less. Right now, today is slightly overcast, so I'm definitely going to leave these out for at least a full 30 minutes. And you'll watch them darken. Sometimes they get a slightly brownish color to them. Don't let that worry you. That's just part of the process. Okay, right now I'm sharing my rinsing space. We have to go into my kitchen. I don't have a studio. I do my work outside on the back deck in warm weather and in a spare bedroom that's been converted to a little mini studio space. So right now we're in my kitchen, one of the sink sides, and I have a towel laid over my countertop to protect it from any dripping cyanotype solution. And then I have two towels, old towels, laid out on my washer and dryer, which are in my kitchen right next to my sink. So this is my drying space for the cyanotypes once I rinse them off. It is important to protect your surfaces. A porous surface will absorb cyanotype solution. Ask me how I know. There's a few cyanotype spots on our back deck as a result of my not covering things very well. So cover your surfaces with some towels to absorb any fluid. I'm going to unclip my papers. And I have my paper. Now, because I'm not trying to protect the surface by having things on it, in a traditional cyanotype, I'm not worried about light from my kitchen window or anything like that with this. And I'm going to turn my cool water, just a nice flow. You can see it there. And I'm just going to put this underneath and let the water flow across it. It's going to remove any excess cyanotype solution. that might be remaining on the paper. And I usually do a couple minutes of this. It's not very dark at this point, and you might at first be going, uh-oh, I didn't do this right. It does take a while for that blue color to show up. So I'm just going to lay this down here and let the water continue on it. And do the next one. And you can see that it's going to gradually get blue as we rinse it. Generally, the suggested rinse time for cyanotypes is about 5 minutes. I tend to be on the impatient side, so once I don't see any blue rinsing off into my sink, I pretty much call it a day, although I might lay it down and put a little more water on it for a couple of minutes. And I have found that really doesn't cause a problem. So they're well rinsed, and I'm going to just gently let them drip off. I'm going to lay them on that towel that I have right next to my sink first, and let them absorb some of that water into that towel, and then I can lift them off and move them over to the drying area and go get the next thing that I'm going to rinse out. Okay, next up I need to rinse my cloth. So this is the piece of cotton cloth. It's a little blotchy. I'm not sure what caused that. It could have been the bits of cyanotype fluid on my acrylic sheet, could have been shadows being cast from the trees around my deck. All kinds of variables here. But I'm going to go ahead and rinse it. It's been out there for over a half an hour. And what you'll notice is a yellowish liquid rinsing off of your fabric. That's the excess cyanotype fluid. You'll notice it on papers, but you notice it a lot more on fabric because more of it will be released as you're rinsing. Your fabric will darken slightly as it dries. Right now I'm just going to rinse it off and then set it on the towel next to the sink to let it drain out a bit before I move it to the area over by my washer and dryer. And the last thing I'm going to do is remove the acrylic sheet and untape my silk and rinse my silk the same way. So the same results. It'll rinse out and I'll shake it out and I'll put it aside to dry along with everything else. Now that all the papers and fabrics are dry, time for a little reveal, again in speed frame. These are my pieces of the paper. They turned out really well. Nice dark color, good images, and not that different from some that I did just a couple days ago on a full sun, no clouds in the sky afternoon. The cloth came out a little bit differently today. You'll notice a bigger difference here. This is my cotton. On the day with more intense sunlight and fewer clouds, you'll see a much darker color of blue. The cyanotype fluid was the same. The amount of time outside was very similar. As a matter of fact, today I actually left things out a little bit longer. And this one here is the silk. So you can see some differences in color. That's dependent on a number of things. Sometimes it's the amount of cyanotype fluid or whether your fluid has the correct proportions. It can also just be how long you left it out and how intense the sun is. You can, if you're putting things into a mixed media piece, you can add a dark color underneath your silks and other lighter weight fabrics in order to darken the look. The process for printing is the same whether you're doing it on the paper or silk or cotton. The only thing that I've done for the fabrics, I have the fabrics taped to a piece of cardboard. That just keeps it from moving while I'm doing the stenciling. And because the paint will often go through the fabric, it also protects my surface. Paper, you can pretty much just print on without any problems at all. So I'll demonstrate first on paper. That's the easiest technique. And I'm going to flip this over. One thing that I have found helpful when doing any kind of stamping is to have a soft, kind of squishy surface underneath what you're printing on. So I'm going to make use of that cardboard. I'm using the heavy body acrylic in iridescent silver. And I'm just going to put a generous little serving on my egg carton and take my foam brush and just spread it out. So basically I'm creating a little mini stamp pad with the paint. Like so. And I'll have some on my foam brush, so I'll flip this over and I'll just lightly brush across it, and especially hit the edges because you want to make sure your edges have a good amount of paint on them. So I have some paint on there to start with, and then just like if I was using a stamp pad, I'm going to put this down into it, get some paint on it. Now it's painted, and I'm going to very carefully put it in place. Press, trying very carefully not to let it slide. Because you have paint rather than ink from a stamp pad, there is a lot more chance that it can slide on your image. But there you go. And then I can restamp it. You can usually get 2 pretty good images before you need to clean your stamp. And there you go. That one was a little bit dirty in that spot, but it still looks okay. To clean this, I like to just start with a paper towel and get the excess off with a paper towel. And then if I'm going to use the same color, generally that's all I need to do. If it has an excessive amount of paint on it, or you're switching colors, you're going to put this under some warm running water. And that's where a little paintbrush comes in handy, because while it's running under the water, you can take that paintbrush and just get all the little bits out. So I'm going to do that right now. Here I'll just do a quick run through. I'm following the exact same procedure to stamp with the gold acrylic on the blue cyanotype cotton cloth. And that turned out pretty well. I had to press, one thing I suggest you do when you're working on fabric, make sure that you have plenty of paint on your stamp, and then press very firmly in order to get a really good image. And on this one, you can see I tried to get 3 images. My first 2 came out pretty good. By the time I got to that third one, I was running a little low on paint. So you'll notice that the center is not quite as well printed. Although I was pretty happy with the first 2 things that I did, this one I'm not as happy with. The images on the silk are not nearly as clear, and I think part of it might have been the color or perhaps the paint. I just don't think I had enough paint on my paint palette to get really good images, so I was a little bit disappointed with these. Okay, time for a little show and tell. Here are the results from today's cyanotypes, on this one on paper, this one on cotton, and my less than stellar effort on the silk. But that was not the fault of the silk. That was the fault of my application of paint on my stenciled image. If you'd like to learn more, I do have a class on Skillshare geared to teens and adults, as well as another YouTube video where I share some ideas for doing cyanotypes with children. So you'll find some links below this video, along with some links to the supplies that I used.